In the summer of 1787, the Constitutional Convention got underway in the same room in Philadelphia where many of the same men had signed the Declaration of Independence. Their passionate debate took place under a shroud of secrecy. Even the windows were covered and sealed to ensure privacy, despite the intense heat.
They would keep it private so that members would be free to speak their own minds without fear of any sort of retribution. And by keeping it private, the public outside would not be continuously assembling to protest or come out in support of certain actions that were being debated in the halls of the convention.
For James Madison, the vow of silence was a function of the magnitude of the event. Madison was the first delegate to arrive in Philadelphia, and he quickly took his place at the center of the drama. Although he was only 35 years old, Madison had been preparing for this moment for a long time.
I think he understands has come to believe that there really is a deep crisis of the Union that requires a kind of comprehensive resolution. We know that he'd worked his way through a couple of trunkloads or more of books that Jefferson had shipped him from Paris, where he goes through a number of classic works and tries to figure out what had gone wrong with this confederation or that confederation, and to try to draw some conclusions on that. So Madison was the kind of politician who understood that most of his colleagues in any legislative assembly were likely to be lazier and less energetic and probably less farsighted than he was. And I think Madison understood that the importance of what we now call agenda control, or the ability to kind of shape an agenda from the outset. And so that's why I think he goes into the convention exceptionally well prepared in terms of all the issues that he thought needed to be canvassed.
The great difficulty lies in the affair of representation. And if this could be adjusted, all others would be surmountable.
The people should have as little to do as may be about the government. They lack information and are constantly liable to be misled.
The popular election of one branch of the national legislature is essential to every plan of free government.
There are two sort of huge issues dealing with representation which lead to two grand compromises in the convention. The first deals with large and small states, specifically how these states would be represented in the new legislature, to which they were going to give enormous powers. The small states wanted the procedure that had been used in the Articles of Confederation to persist, and that is each state gets an equal vote regardless of size. The large states thought this was unfair. I mean, how could it be that if you had 500,000 inhabitants, you would have the same clout as Delaware with 50-some-odd thousand inhabitants?
The proceedings soon bogged down in seemingly irreconcilable differences.
Their ideas are so different, their prejudices so strong and so various, and their particular interests seeming so opposite that not a move can be made that is not contested.
Differences over representation were finally resolved by the Great Compromise. Each state would have an equal number of votes in the Senate, while in the House, members would be apportioned by population. Meanwhile, the delegates had come to another, more ominous agreement. The so-called 3/5 compromise allowed that slaves be counted as 3/5 of a person when calculating population for representation.
I think it has to be understood as a sectional compromise, and it's offensive to us for lots of reasons. But the alternative that you have to think about is if the South doesn't get some additional benefit or some kind of coefficient to increase its representation, why should it stay in the Union? That's the issue here. If you want to have a union and the South is demanding, or Southern delegates are saying, precisely because we're going to be in a minority, and we know that anti-slavery sentiment is already growing in the North, we would be nuts to come into this arrangement if we don't have some means of protecting ourselves. So that's kind of the ugly truth about it.
Religion and humanity have nothing to do with this question. Interest alone is the governing principle with nations.
Once the deadlock was broken, the work proceeded at a brisker pace, and the structure of the new government began to take shape.
The most important change the framers made really comes right out of Madison's analysis of what's wrong with the Confederation, which is you can't have a Confederation that's going to rely on the states to carry out national policy. You need a national government that's going to be able to enact, execute, and adjudicate its own laws. You need the whole array of institutions that Americans then thought of as being the full expression of what a government ought to be. So that means a legislature divided bicamerally with two houses. You need an independent executive, and I guess equally interestingly, you need some kind of an independent judiciary. I think the framers understood the judiciary would be the institution most responsible for mediating or working out conflicts in those areas where national government and state government or national law and state law overlapped or came into conflict or were somehow in tension with each other.
When the delegates finished their work in September, they agreed to preserve the secrecy of their debates. But Madison carefully saved his notes, letters, and memos, and his papers form the basis of much of what we know about the creation of the Constitution.
He did want people to know how the deliberations had unfolded, and I think that was because he himself had tried to figure out what had happened in the formation of previous governments, and he couldn't come up with a coherent story. We don't really know how most nations began. So I think Madison was very sensitive to the needs of historians like myself. I mean, I owe him a lot. We all owe him something as citizens, but I owe him a lot, I suppose, as a historian.